So again, welcome to this very important discussion and toolkit launch. We're here to discuss solidarity with Palestinian workers, especially Palestinian workers in the university and education sector more broadly, and to introduce this very practical resource that we have created. The toolkit that we will be discussing today has mostly been made with the context of the UK, but many of the lessons within it are applicable to organizing in any university across the world. But when we speak about the arms trade in particular today, it will be relevant to UK universities and the UK arms trade. Over the past year, many of us have been demonstrating against the ongoing genocide in Gaza. We have launched divestment campaigns. We have passed motions. We have passed boycott motions in our union branches. We've supported the student encampment. It has been a challenging year for many of us, especially those of us who are Palestinian, trying to organize on UK university campuses and to bear the silencing campaign that has gone on. At the same time, the devastation in Gaza has been staggering. Israeli attacks have damaged or destroyed 90% of the schools and 13 higher education institutions, leaving educators and students without safe spaces to learn and to teach. Now, many people point to the destruction of the education sector in Gaza. Part of the issue of just thinking of the destruction is that we think of the buildings, but we don't consider the staff and the workers who are essentially these universities. In the case of Palestinian workers, they have been actually continuing with their university work. They are teaching wherever, whatever space they can have. They are teaching online. Most of them, of course, are not getting paid. So when we frame this idea of the destruction of the sector, we need to always remember that it's actually workers that make up this sector, not simply the buildings. The Palestinian university sector is one of the most highly unionized in Palestine. It is a very active and effective sector because education is so important for Palestinians. As Israeli settler colonialism displaces Palestinians, education becomes one of the cornerstones that people can hold on to. But despite the atrocities that many of us have seen, the university sector has largely been silent and in many ways even complicit. And we know this through the many investments and partnerships with arms companies that the university sector holds, which we will hear more about tonight. In the university sector, in order to really organize more effectively, we need to start targeting these research contracts and partnerships that are directly relevant to the arms trade, that are directly relevant to the complicity of UK universities with the Israeli ongoing genocide. So today's event is really about turning our outrage into action. How do we actually make complicity impossible on our universities? And I know that many of us start from the perspective of how do we support our students and the encampments. We also want to turn this question a little bit on ourselves and think, how do we organize as staff in these universities? How do we put more pressure on these managements and administrations so we could more effectively also support the students? How can workers strategically organize to sever the ties with the arms trade and build power from below? So the Workers in Palestine Toolkit that we will be discussing today exactly talks about strategies for mapping our workplaces, mobilizing workers, and pressuring these institutions. So we can together refuse complicity and make this work more effective. So today you will hear from organizers about the situation of university workers in Palestine. And for us in Workers in Palestine, this is crucial because we always begin from solidarity with Palestinian workers who are not an imaginary workforce. We're not in a solidarity with an imaginary Palestine, but real people who are doing this kind of work. We will examine how universities are complicit in the ongoing destruction of Palestinian life. We'll discuss how we can use this toolkit to mobilize as workers, and we will learn from success stories that have happened in our sector internationally. As the toolkit highlights, universities often play an active role in upholding systems of oppression, as many of us know, whether through investments, research collaborations, or simply silencing dissent. So our goal here is to really challenge complicity, And I cannot think of a more fantastic lineup of speakers, activists, and researchers who have been building this campaign from the grassroots up for several years now, well before the ongoing genocide. So let me introduce our speakers in the order in which they will speak. First, Dr. Kanwal from Scholars for Palestine will set the stage with a discussion of the university sector in Palestine. Then Professor Anna from Sussex University and Shadow World Investigations will uncover how universities are complicit with a focus on the arms trade. Dr. Sara from King's College London will introduce the toolkit in more detail and share some of its organizing vision. And last but not least, Anam from the University of California, we are very glad could join us today, will take us through successful and inspiring organizing that has happened at the University of California campus in the past year. Many of us have heard about this organizing, but it's about thinking through how do we build momentum for that type of organizing. Just a few logistical points. You will all be muted for the duration of the speakers so we can actually focus and listen to what they have to say. Then we will unmute the chat and take some questions in the chat, which I'll try to curate. The idea is to build our collective organizing together. So this is a starting point. It's not an end point to this conversation. So without further ado, let's dive into this discussion, and we will start with Dr. Kanwal from Scholars for Palestine.
Thank you, Rafi, for this introduction, and thank you all for the work that went to organizing this. Do you hear me well? Give me some kind of visual indication. Okay, I'm just going to quickly talk us through, establishing the kind of reality and the situation of the academic sector for workers in Palestine. So, I mean, speaking of the higher education sector, first of all, so Palestine has 52 higher education institutions. This includes universities, open universities, colleges, and community colleges. The majority of some 217,000 students registered are female, around 60%. And the academic sector has over 7,000 teaching academics. This is taken from FOBZU's report, which is linked actually in the toolkit, so you can have a look at that for more details. And FOBZU also say that education has been a source of both hope and transformation for the Palestinian people. It has been a site actually of colonial and anti-colonial contestation and anti-colonial nationalism since at least the 1920s, during the British colonial mandate era, and linked into the Great Revolt of 1936-9, which of course had Palestinian peasantry at its heart. After the Nakba in 1948, students and teachers also played a critical role in rebuilding Palestinian society. And then fast forward all the way up until the First Intifada, when Israel took control of basically almost every aspect of government schooling. This involved enforcing Israeli-centered curriculum, all educational institutions being subject to military harassment. The education sector, again, was the site of organized struggle. From it emerged a practice of popular education, initially through the unified national leadership of the uprising, but also adopted officially by the education sector's workers' union. So as Rafif mentioned, today in Gaza, where we see the unfolding genocidal violence, again, the educational sector in schools in Gaza have taken on the role of shelters, but also informally through the people based there and outside through this network of social relations that have run through schools, connecting to political organizations and communities. They have been sites that are part of the ongoing work to organize food, aid, initially cash, even supplying tents to people to reach and be distributed within Gaza. Members of the education sector have also tried to cross this imposed colonial geography through, for example, online teaching, and work that tries to sustain life and its possibilities in Palestine. So over time, I'm just going to take you through some features that are persistent throughout this year that I've been discussing across fragmented Palestine. And I mean fragmented geographically in terms of military control and under differing colonial jurisdictions. The conditions for Palestinian workers in the education sector is structured by features that do basically three things. They deny access to the sector, they interrupt its functioning, and they work to depoliticize the sector, disconnecting it from its historical roles. This happens through a number of ways, for example, war, economic closure, planning restrictions, limits and attacks on freedom of movement, military detention, the isolation of the Palestinian education sector within the different areas of Palestine, and also from international academic exchange mechanisms, the largest donor being the United States. And with the incoming president, that's also something that we need to watch. I can talk more about any of those, but I don't want to take out too much time. I want to focus on bringing this into conversation with the topic of today. What's happening in Gaza right now has been described as scholasticide, a term coined by Professor Kanwal, and in context of this, the Israeli war in Gaza in 2009, actually, but also referencing this broader pattern of attacks on Palestinian scholars, educational institutions, students, and workers in education in Palestine. And this entails a systemic destruction in whole or in part of educational life of a national group. I don't need to tell you how that's being done. We've all watched the news. As well as targeting the education sector through this genocidal violence. Teachers, like Rafif mentioned, in Gaza and the West Bank haven't received their salaries since November 2023 because of the withholding of tax funds by the colonial governments. So I'll just finish by drawing our attention to two main things. The first is the Gaza Emergency Committee, which are mentioned in the toolkit, who have issued a statement affirming their existence and collective determination to resume teaching and studying inside Gaza, to resist ongoing scholasticide, and also to look critically at efforts to create kind of brain drain and suction outwards from Gaza itself. And they've called for a number of measures to support the sustenance of the education sector and its rebuilding inside Gaza. And then the second one is where the Palestinian Federation of Unions of University Professors and Employees and Academy of Science and Technology have called on global academic institutions to end institutional ties with complicit Israeli universities. And finally, the academic and teachers unions have been signatories to Worker in Palestine Stop Arming Israel call. And I'll end by reiterating that as the most immediate and effective way of supporting the efforts of the Palestinian education sector itself. The call from Palestinian trade unions to all university workers is to take action against our own institutions' complicity in the Israeli genocidal war machine. And for this, as Rafi said, means focusing on ending research contracts and partnerships that directly or indirectly contribute to the development of military technology, which is being used to oppress and kill Palestinians. I'll conclude with one line that's in our book. It's from the Gaza Emergency Committee. They say, the rebuilding of Gaza's academic institutions is not just a matter of education, it's a testament to our resilience, determination, and unwavering commitment to securing a future for generations to come. We built these universities from tents, and from tents, with the help of our friends, we will rebuild them once again. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kanwal, for that brilliant intervention. And Anna, you're up next.
Thank you so much, Rafif, and thank you to Workers in Palestine for putting the labour into organising and facilitating this. And thanks to everyone who has made an hour to show up for this. It's really good to be here. I want to talk about three things. One is the forms of complicity that the university sector is involved with the genocide and occupation and apartheid. Then a very brief overview of UK involvement in the arms trade with Israel, and then some examples of university involvement with that arms trade so that we can set the scene then for moving into the discussion of the toolkit. So in terms of ways in which the university sector, our individual institutions, the sector as a whole are complicit in the genocide are firstly, and kind of the thing that we're going to be focused on mostly today is research and development for weapons and for other coercive and surveillance technologies. That's kind of the most immediate and direct way. Then there are things like investments through university investment funds, and also through our USS pension scheme. There is some option to indicate that you want to invest ethically once you reach a certain threshold, but before that, USS it is a significant investment mode of investment in the arms trade. And then, of course, there's more widely research that normalizes the genocide, occupation, and apartheid, maybe not directly for material gain, but certainly for ideological gain. So we're going to focus on the former, partly to concentrate on the material and the political economy of the genocide. And because the arms trade is one of the direct issues on which Palestinian trade unions have reached out to us, and they have asked us to flex the muscle of solidarity with them. It's also in the UK one of the most sort of visible ways in which support for UK support for Israel has been contested. So UK involvement in the arms trade with Israel is simultaneously fairly small compared to the United States, which is by a huge margin, obviously the biggest military supporter of Israel, but it is nonetheless pivotal. And it's pivotal not only through the ways in which companies sell their weapons to the Israeli military, there's also direct UK military involvement. We know now from news reporting from Declassified that there are direct RAF flights of weapons made by British companies to Israel. But it's also a two-way trade. The Israeli arms industry has a significant presence in Britain. So a company like Elbit, Israel's largest arms company, companies like that are considered part of the UK defence industrial base. So I think disrupting that is also a really important part of challenging not only the material support for the genocide, but also the normalisation of it in British political life. And what we've seen in the past year or so is the fairly unprecedented and sustained mass protest in Britain, and the window of opportunity of a general election that led to 4 independent MPs elected on a pro-Gaza platform. And it is that protest, it is that pressure, sort of enormous and labour and time consuming and exhausting as it was, that much effort was needed to get this woeful and inadequate but nonetheless significant partial suspension of arms exports. So the UK government has admitted for the first time, and it's ludicrous when you know anything about how the arms trade operates or when you've been paying attention to Israeli violence against Palestinians, but it is still significant. The UK government has admitted for the first time that there is a clear risk that UK supplied weapons might be misused by Israel. And that means that they have suspended some arms exports. There are some really big loopholes in that, however. They've excluded training equipment. They've excluded transfers that go via the United States. For really good reporting on this, I recommend Middle East Eye, in particular, Dania Akkad, and Declassified, in particular, John McAvoy's work. So to just give you a couple of examples to close of the direct ways in which universities are involved with that material support for the military dimension of the genocide. Sheffield University, I see that we have some colleagues from Sheffield here. Sheffield University has an advanced manufacturing research centre, and that includes Boeing and BAE Systems as partners. And that research centre works on the F-35 fighter jet, which is one of the planes that we know Israel is using to bomb Gaza, and is also one of the programs that is subject to this exemption to the arms suspension. Another example is the University of Southampton. Their Centre for Defence and Security Research has as industrial partners BAE Systems, Northrop Grumman. And again, these are massive internationalising arms companies, and they have a presence in our local universities. So that's just 2 examples. I see from people's profiles that we have colleagues here from Exeter, from Queen Mary, from Nottingham. I've had a quick look on the demilitarised education database. You guys are in there as well. So whatever university you're at, use this toolkit to examine sort of, how your university is involved, and use the toolkit to organise and mobilise. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And Anna is too good an organizer to cite her own work, but please read Anna's work on all of this research because she's been tracking it and doing an incredible job. Sara, over to you.
Yes, so thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you, of course, to Workers in Palestine for organizing this meeting. So I'm going to introduce what is in the toolkit and how we can use it to organize on our campuses to challenge the complicity that Anna has just talked about. So again, the toolkit is designed as a resource for us to start challenging the complicity of our institutions as workers. And I would like to reiterate one of the points that Rafif mentioned at the beginning, that we have been focused and we should continue to focus on supporting our students in their organizing. But it's also important for us to focus on conversations about our power and our leverage as workers and how we as workers can organize in the context of our union and make the case that Palestine is a workplace issue and that we don't want our labor to be used to further the destruction of Palestinian lives. So the toolkit starts from the premise that the ongoing genocide has been pushing many of us to try to make our organizing more effective. And again, how do we make complicity impossible in our institutions? The type of strategy that the toolkit outlines is a strategy that focuses on building power from below and developing a rank and file strategy. So again, as university workers, most of us are part of a trade union or we can join a trade union. Rank and file members are members that do not have an official role within the union, so it's ordinary members. And as ordinary members, we can join forces and put pressure on our administrators and managers from below in order for those research contracts and research partnerships to be reviewed and reconsidered. Our managers are not going to make that decision on their own. They will never grant us the end of those research contracts without us organizing collectively from below. And another point that's important when we're thinking about the rank and file strategy is that we cannot wait for the leaders in our union to start this campaign for us. We cannot wait for others to make the change for us. We can start organizing within our own department, within very few colleagues, and even from a small starting group, we can develop a rank and file strategy and build that power that we need. So the toolkit outlines some of the possible ways that you can get started with this type of work. You can start from a relatively small team. So you can build your core team of people that perhaps you've already had conversations with in your department, some fellow co-workers. And from there, you can start researching the complicity of your institutions with weapon manufacturers and arms companies. The toolkit gives some examples of how you can start that research. Sometimes this information is available on the website of your own university. You can look at budget reports, annual general meetings of the executive board, or sometimes you can even look for information about your university and arm companies by just typing the name of your university and names of different arm companies that you know are complicit with Israeli militarism on a simple search engine. If you're based in the UK, it's also possible for you to submit FOI requests, Freedom of Information requests, and there are some suggestions about how you can get started with those. And of course, often it's the workers themselves that are based in some of the departments that are likely to have those research contracts and research partnerships that can provide the information that you need to start building a campaign. Once you have that information, there are some steps that are suggested in terms of how you can start your outreach campaign, reach out to the workers in your departments where those contracts are located, and how you can start conversations, collective conversations about what to do about the situation. Something else that you will find in the toolkit alongside a guide to initiate those conversations is how you can potentially use union motions to achieve the same result and to, again, mobilize people and mobilize the rank and file in your workplace. A lot of us in the UK are located in universities whose union branches passed solidarity motions last year in the wake of the genocide. And something that is more effective for us when we think about union motions is not passing the motion per se. So passing the motion is often not enough because then the motion sits there, but is to organize around the branch motions. So to make sure that they are a collective effort, that they represent action points that people agreed to as part of preliminary conversations. You can organize around branch motions by making sure that people come to the branch, by designating different speakers to prepare to speak in defense of different parts of the motion. And then, of course, that work of bringing people together that you will do in the preparation of the motion and in the discussion of the motion at the branch meeting is also the infrastructure that you will keep mobilizing to make sure that the motion gets implemented. And then there's action points and ways to follow through with the requests that the motion makes. So before I hand over for some concrete examples of how this organizing has happened in some of our universities. Again, something that I would like to reiterate is that we have power as workers and we have power in mobilizing other workers on our workplace. And again, this is the main message of the toolkit. This is a type of organizing that each of us can start. And we don't have to wait for other people to do the work for us from the leadership of our union, and even less from the management of our universities. Thank you.
Many thanks, Sara. I have to say that Sara and myself both worked at KCL, and when we brought the union motion around Palestine to our branch, the organizing that went into that was a solid month's work, but it was the best attended trade union meeting we've had in the past several years. And it's been an absolute pleasure organizing with Sara in a quite difficult sector and institution, I should say. I'm so excited to turn it over to our final speaker, Anam, who's going to speak about the University of California example. And I know that many of us in the UK context are very excited about how this work happened. Many times we only hear the flashy end story of organizing, but not actually the hard work and the steps that went into getting us there. And what we wanted to make sure of in this discussion is, as we celebrate this example, to also think through how we can build on it, how we can do similar things, and the hard work of organizing that went behind it. So, Anam, over to you.
Hi, everyone, and good evening. Thanks so much for Workers in Palestine for inviting me here and for organizing this. The toolkit is wonderful and I think super helpful for us also here at the University of California. I'm here to share a few lessons from labor organizing for Palestine within our system. And I know it's a bit of a different context from where many of you are coming from, but I hope that some of these lessons are helpful at least. I think my main point here is that labor organizing and industrial labor action in solidarity with Palestine on our campuses has taken a long-term building up of a political rank and file organizing. It's also taken defining creative and concrete linkages between labor conditions and Palestine, and then on top of that, a strategic use of catalytic moments to move us from complicity to capacity. And so, as I'm sure you guys are aware, in the spring, members of our union, UAW 4811, the Union of Graduate Workers, Teaching Assistants, and Researchers on the 10 campuses at the University of California, went on strike to protest the university's violent police response to the Palestine solidarity encampments. This strike had as its core the demands of free speech and academic freedom, divestment from arms manufacturers, and a program of transitional funding to help graduate researchers transition off of projects that are funded by the military. This strike and demands didn't just come from the immediate circumstances of violent police repression, but from months and even years of rank-and-file organizing on our campuses. And here, for this case, I want to focus on the demand to establish transitional funding for graduate researchers who work on military research projects as key to the strike in the spring. This is a really important tactic of labor organizing in solidarity with Palestine that came out of the University of California, Santa Cruz's astronomy department, in which they recognize that we as graduate workers make up a really important node of research production for the Department of Defense and military contractors in our country. This demand for transition of funding from military research projects was core to mobilizing around the connection between our labor conditions in Palestine, and it turns our complicity into capacity for disruption, divestment, and divestment from the military and genocide through linking our working conditions with the political demand for Palestine. That being said, the organizing conditions at each campus are in the university system between our 10 campuses vary a lot. At Santa Cruz, their department organizing and democratic rank and file goes quite deep. Here at Santa Barbara, organizers are facing a more disengaged union body, so our work is cut out for us in a lot of ways. And one group that has emerged here of rank and file organizing that is a group that has taken the name Researchers Against War and has different iterations across campuses. But this group, Researchers Against War, is made up of graduate workers that have worked to understand how military research takes place on our campus and has worked to organize lab workers who are perhaps on these military projects. This organizing body has been really key at our campus, not only to pushing transitional funding as a demand, but as a mobilizing tactic to organize our rank and file who are mostly in STEM research. Arguing this demand as both a political one of conscientious objection that is part of Palestine solidarity, and one that helps researchers continually being abused by their bosses, helps us bring workers together over a political demand and build collective power. Our strike in the spring ended with the university cracking down through legal means without meeting our demands, but the organizing goes on. And even from the strike and in the last few months, we have won a pilot program for transitional funding across our campuses that we are then working to expand. And as our contract is set to be bargained again in the next few months, we are more ready and committed and positioned to win a contract through the lessons learned from the strike last year and also through the months of rank and file organizing that has taken place since. This contract that we're hoping to bargain has a divestment of our retirement funds and transitional funding as core demands that have now been democratically voted in as main priorities in our next contract. Our work in the next few months is really cut out for us and involves taking the lessons from our last strike, translating the research about links to the military, to the labor conditions of research labs, and going department by department to organize around the demands set out for us in the next strike and bargaining cycle. We will not stop, we will not rest, and I invite you all to read about the University of California organizing lessons in our wonderful toolkit here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, we should have mentioned that the toolkit actually ends with very specific examples of workplace organizing that have taken place from the University of California, but also some things here. Our chat is now open. Please put your question in there. If it's to a specific speaker, let us know who it's directed to, and I will try to curate as best as I can. Everyone should be able to put things in the chat as I speak. Since we don't have any questions yet, I wanted to ask Kanwal a question about the Gaza Emergency Committee. And if you can tell us a little bit more about their work and their demands and why that work is happening in the first place.
Thanks, Rafi. Yeah, and thank you for allowing me to go back to it. If you'd give me just a second, I don't know what I've done. I minimized the file. Now the 700 browser windows that I have open are impeding my efforts. But yeah, in any case, I think this is the Gaza Emergencies Committee, which brought together this group of Palestinian academics and staffs from the universities there, can really feed well into student organizing. Also, I know students have been really successful in winning, scholarships and funding that goes towards Palestinians. But they've issued a series of priorities, and I urge you all to have a look at their website because they're laid out in very plain language and very, operable. Like there are things that you can do with these the priorities that they outline. But I think what it was issued as was a kind of warning against efforts to kind of remove the rebuilding or the reconstruction of the university sector in Gaza away from the demands and needs of people actually located within there. And yeah, that kind of runs through it and it shapes the priorities. And the kind of things that they're asking for example, are public pledges to rebuild Gaza universities, immediate support for teaching online, support for exiled students, many of whom who are suspended, for example, right now in Egypt, as well as research, longer term things such as research collaboration on more. So this kind of very practically oriented call also has a warning against promoting alleged reconstruction schemes that kind of eliminate the possibility of independent Palestinian educational life in Gaza. Thanks, Sophie, for flagging that.
Thank
I hope
you.
I answered your question.
Absolutely, yes. I just one thing to point out too with the kind of organizing we're speaking about in terms of Stop Arming Israel on campuses, it's a lot of university management are trying to juxtapose supporting universities in Gaza to ending complicity. And sometimes they drag us into these endless negotiations about like what kinds of support they can offer without the actual demands around complicity. And it's actually quite a smart management way to get us away from the conversations that are about the arms trade. And I think it's very important for the type of organizing we're discussing to not see these things as dichotomies that are opposite from each other, but to think through how we can put forward demands that link these questions very clearly. The question of how do we support Gaza universities and ending complicity at the same time, because there's no point giving scholarships if you're helping to destroy these universities in the first place and supporting the arms companies that are doing that. Everyone in the chat is being very shy. I know we have some incredible organizers with us on the call from Sheffield who've done incredible work around complicity on your campus and the arms trade on your campus specifically. So if you have any questions about the type of organizing and how this toolkit might affect it or change it, please don't be shy, put your questions in the chat. The entire point of this space is to start building and mobilizing a network across the country where we're thinking about rank and file organizing in a serious way. And also for those of us who are members of UCU, outside of a lot of the factionalism that's sometimes not very useful in our UCU branches, in taking this work seriously and kind of doing trade union work in a different way that is more constructive and positive, as our sector is clearly under attack at the moment. Sara, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the specific steps that happened at KCL in terms of building for the pledge and building for the union motion and how that all fit together.
Yes, I think that's something that I wanted to add. I mentioned the importance of conversations with our co-workers, and in fact, the toolkit can kickstart those conversations. So if you have some mailing lists of colleagues, or perhaps clearly after 1 year of organizing, you will have some WhatsApp groups of colleagues that want to organize solidarity for Palestine. The toolkit is also a way to start those conversations and can offer a template also for people to start exploring these options of non-compliance. So at King's, I think that was an experience that many of us had last year. When the genocide started, there was this feeling that we didn't have an infrastructure for doing that work in the context of our union more broadly and our branch in particular. So we had to start gathering people step by step and establishing the infrastructure for conversations, and then to start collective conversations about the actions that we wanted to undertake together. And partly, again, we did it through a branch motion. We did it by trying to gather people to make sure that we passed a branch motion. But the branch motion, we made sure that it was collectively discussed. It took a while, clearly, and there is always an element of compromise because different people want to list different action points. But then the point is not the motion. The point are precisely those conversations that go into establishing what we want, what is it that we want to change in our workplaces, and what are the steps that we can undertake together in terms of what we want the motion to request at the end, but also it's a commitment for us in terms of the actions that we want to see implemented going ahead. So we gathered some rank and file members in a Palestine collective, and through the outreach related to the motion, we kept asking people whether they wanted to join this core organizing group that ended up being around 60 people in the end. And after the motion passed, and again, as Rafif mentioned, it was a very well-attended branch meeting, we started those conversations about, okay, what is needed on campus for us to be able to implement the asks of the motion. So the next steps were the creation of a student staff assembly, because we wanted to make sure that there was a space for us to, again, work on our union and develop this rank and file strategy for us as workers, but also connect with student organizing in terms of the demands that we wanted for the campus. And then last year, we continued this work of outreach by starting a BDS pledge, whereby people could individually pledge that they're going to adhere to the main tenets of BDS. But again, just like for the motion, just like for petitions, I would really encourage our, the people that are attending this meeting not to think of them as ends in themselves, but to think of them as ways for us to start those conversations and again, build the power from below with your co-workers.
Brilliant, thank you. And we have an excellent question in the chat about how we build relationships in the specific sectors that tend to be mostly STEM doing this research. So Anam, that's you.
Totally, yeah. I'm happy to talk about the example of Researchers Against War. We have taken the tack of both a disruption and also a kind of inviting people in with kindness and with understanding that their labor conditions are also in part of the struggle. And I think that so the Researchers Against War group was founded at Santa Cruz with the Department of Astrology, but then on Santa Barbara, it's also taken a lot of social scientists and humanistic workers who then are in solidarity with some of the STEM researchers that are in our group. And so I think that cross collaboration has been really important in understanding what are the working conditions within these labs and how deeply hierarchical the relationship is between the principal investigator who receives the grant and the graduate worker. And so I think that part of the work that we're trying to do is both expose how the Department of Engineering on our campus, 35% of their funding comes from the Department of Defense. And so we're trying to expose both these linkages, but then also try to meet the lab workers where they're at. We have a monthly recurring series called Beers Not Bombs, in which we kind of invite STEM workers to come out for a beer with us, and we have usually some guiding questions in those times to say, oh, this is how the funding structure works in your lab or in your department. Do you know about it? What have you thought about it? How do you relate to it? And things like that. And I think through that, it's actually been really helpful to talk to people about it, because they know so much more of the specifics within their own STEM research that relate to potentially military consequences or how the funding works. And so I think that it's been a process of both meeting people where they're at and then challenging people to politicize themselves a little bit more around this funding structures. I think that, yeah, the specific tactics we've used, we've disrupted career fairs, we have talked to undergraduate workers, we have done big kind of mass rallies, and then we've also done this kind of Beers Not Bombs sequence, and then also we are now working to map each laboratory and see where the workers in it are at, and to meet them in their labs and in their working conditions as a site of rank and file organizing. I hope that's helpful.
That is super helpful because it really takes us to the question of how do we organize in practice and what kinds of spaces can we open. And I think, Anna, you wanted to bring that a little bit to our sector here also and some of the conditions we're facing.
Yeah, sure. And I think it also links to the question from in the chat from Diala about how to engage colleagues in the sciences. So I don't know about everyone else's places, but we've just had an announcement today from our VC that they're opening a voluntary severance scheme and they need at least 300 people to leave. And she used the phrase as many as possible. So that, you know, we are not the sector is undergoing a process of pretty radical transformation right now, and loads of us are going to lose our jobs, most likely, blah, blah, blah. Disaster. However, it's also the time, the moment to have, everyone is terrified. It's exactly the moment to have conversations with our colleagues about what do we want to salvage from this? What do we want to save? What do we want to keep? What do we want to fight for? When you take an example from the arms industry, Google the Lucas Plan. So the Lucas Plan was something that came about when workers at Lucas Aerospace were going to be made redundant because there wasn't demand for their products. And it was the threat of job losses that made them come together to think about like, what's our workplace democracy like? Like, what do we want to make? How are we going to keep our jobs? And it was from that conversation about based on the threat of losing their jobs that they got to the point of socially responsible production. So they didn't start with an anti-militarist politics. They started with a trade union politics that became an anti-militarist politics because they realized that actually you can make much better things that help a lot more people and end up contributing more better to the economy. And the two things went together. Workplace democracy went hand in hand with the stuff they made. I think that is quite literally it's in one sense, it's exactly the conversations we need to be having. The problem we have is that the military is going to be the one thing that's protected in the current conjuncture, right? That's the one thing the government isn't going to get rid of. But it's the sorts of things that we can open conversations with our colleagues about. I don't know about you guys. I don't even know that many scientists because we're all really ghettoized in terms of the geography of our campus. But that's the really basic organizing work is of like, who do you know through the union? Who do you know through any kind of social networks, research networks, anything like cafe networks, if people are still going to campus? It is don't underestimate the power of the chance conversation that they then go on and have a conversation with something else. A lot of us will feel like we're starting from nothing if we don't know a lot of people who are directly doing the work that the Palestinian trade unions have asked us to help stop. But like, this is how we build that. I think this moment in higher education, as depressing as it is a chance for us to think about what we want to salvage in this sector.
Brilliant. I haven't heard the disastrous situation in our sector being put so well before this, and hopefully as a moment that we can actually use to mobilize people. I think the idea behind this toolkit is that we also want to organize the unorganized. We want to build a team of people who will support us, but we also want to reach out to colleagues who might not know about this issue, might want to be learning more about it. And union motions help us to do that sometimes. Statements help us to do that. There was a question in the chat about whether universities issue statements or stay quiet about the work they're doing. I guess what the toolkit really encourages people to think about is a campaign arc and thinking through where do we want to get to. A statement could be a step along that way, but what we really want as the end goal is for this complicity to end those arms contracts, and for universities to basically be apartheid-free zones. That's what we're working towards. So thinking of motions or statements as steps a long way in the campaign, not the end goal. Because sometimes universities are very happy to put out a statement, or sometimes we pass a motion in our union branches, but it's actually not actionable. It's rhetorical, or it's just about, we generally show support, but what we need is to move from mere rhetoric to actual action that can actually put pressure on the Israeli war machine and on the British government. as Anna said, while our sector is largely being decimated. I want to apologize to a colleague from Harvard who's asked the question, but to be honest, I don't think I know how to articulate it well because it seems to be specific to the actual debate happening within the union. So I'll try to reread it and see if I can reformulate it more clearly. Thanks to everyone who's thanking us. There was a question about Germany and the difficulties of organizing within the German context. The union we have is a bit different in the sense that there has been a long-standing support for Palestine in motions that preceded this genocide. But a lot of it has remained on that more rhetorical level. So part of what we really want to do is, again, move it from the rhetoric to the action. There has been divestment in our pension fund, which is really remarkable. And it's something we are very proud of that we finally got to that stage. But getting to that stage was through a lot of rank and file organizing, people putting motions in every sector of the union and at congresses. So again, when we hear of these successes that happen right at the end, we tend to just look at the end without looking at the organizing that went through. One thing Workers in Palestine is doing is trainings for people who want to do this kind of work. The basics of how do you map your workplace? How do you have the basic conversations around Palestine? How do you make it an issue in your contract? So please stay in touch with us. Please look out for these trainings. And please use the toolkit. This toolkit came out of a collective effort. Many people organizing on different campuses helped to put it together. And what we really wanted to do is to be a resource for organizing and for building this kind of rank and file network. So you have our email, it's in the toolkit. Please use the toolkit. We did promise people that we will finish on time. And that's one important organizing thing to always think through when you have events, is to start and finish on time, because people have different responsibilities and need to get home and etc. So that's always something to be mindful of. So I won't take up more of your time. If you have any questions or even anything that would be useful to add to the toolkit, don't hesitate to email us. Again, this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. I hope it got you thinking a little bit about how we can do this work differently and how we can do it together. So thank you so much for attending. You have our email in the chat, and we look forward to organizing a lot more with you in the future. And thanks to all our brilliant speakers, of course, for giving us their time.